Here's a question you probably never expected a History Channel to ask out loud. Did ancient humans masturbate? It sounds like a joke question, but it's actually a real, seriously studied area of archaeology and anthropology. And the answer takes us through cave art, ancient religion, ancient medicine, and a surprising amount of shame that got bolted onto this behavior only fairly recently in human history. So let's actually dig into the evidence. Where does it start? What did ancient people believe about it? And when and why did it suddenly become something to be ashamed of? Before we even get to human history, it's worth zooming out to biology because that tells us something important right away. This behavior isn't unique to humans. It shows up across the primate family tree. It's in monkeys, in apes, in some of our closest living relatives. Researchers who study animal behavior have documented it extensively in wild and captive primate populations. That matters because it tells us this almost certainly isn't a modern invention, a side effect of civilization, or something people picked up out of boredom once they had free time. It looks like a deeply old behavior, likely present in our species long before anyone was writing anything down, farming anything, or building a single permanent structure. In other words, by the time humans started leaving a written or artistic record at all, this was already an old established part of being a primate. Now here's where it gets tricky. Proving specific behaviors from deep prehistory is hard in general, and this is an especially hard one to prove. Unlike tools, bones, or fire pits, private behavior doesn't leave much physical trace. Nobody carved a how-to manual into a cave wall for future archaeologists. So most of what we can say about the earliest humans is based on indirect clues, figurative art, symbolic carvings, and comparisons to our closest animal relatives. That said, once humans started making figurative art, carving and sculpting the human body, sexuality shows up almost immediately as a subject. Prehistoric carvings and figurines depicting stylized human bodies, exaggerated reproductive features, and clear sexual acts start appearing tens of thousands of years ago. Some archaeologists argue this shows that early human sexuality wasn't purely about reproduction, that pleasure itself was already being represented and likely understood as its own thing. So, while we can't point to a single prehistoric diary entry confirming the specific behavior, the broader picture, primate biology plus early symbolic art around sexuality, makes it extremely likely this was already part of human life well before recorded history began. Once we get into actual written history, the picture gets a lot clearer, and honestly, a lot less repressed than most people would expect. The Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations with written records, appear to have had a notably relaxed attitude towards sex in general. Historical accounts suggest they saw masturbation as something that could actually enhance sexual vitality, for men and women both, rather than something shameful or harmful. There's even evidence that men used a specialized oil to reduce friction during solo sex, essentially an early lubricant. This wasn't hidden or coded in embarrassed language. It was treated as a normal, practical part of life alongside partnered sex. This tells us something important. Shame around this topic isn't some ancient, universal human default. It's a layer that got added later, and we're about to see exactly where a lot of that layer came from. If the Sumerians were relaxed about it, ancient Egypt went even further. They built it directly into their creation mythology. According to Egyptian myth, the god Atum created the universe through a solitary act, essentially bringing the first gods into existence himself, alone, before anything else existed. Some versions of the myth even connect this act symbolically to the life-giving, cyclical flooding of the Nile River, tying an act of solo pleasure to the very force that made Egyptian civilization and agriculture possible. This wasn't treated as shameful subtext either. It was religious, foundational, and openly discussed as part of the mythology, explaining how the universe itself began. For the Egyptians, this act sat closer to divine and creative than dirty or forbidden. Compare that to how differently this topic gets treated barely a couple thousand years later, and the shift becomes pretty striking. Ancient Greece gives us a more complicated and honestly more familiar picture, one where class and social status start to matter. Greek vase paintings frequently depicted masturbation, often in a comedic or lighthearted way, sometimes involving mythological figures like satyrs, sometimes just ordinary people, rendered with the same casualness as any other everyday scene. But there was also a social hierarchy attached to it. In parts of Greek society, this behavior got associated more with slaves, foreigners, and women, while free Greek men were expected to project a certain kind of controlled, restrained image in public life. So it wasn't shame in the modern sense, Monasa, it was more like a status marker, something considered beneath the ideal of the disciplined, self-controlled citizen. This is really the first hint of what's coming. This act's starting to get tangled up with judgment, class, and social respectability. Not because of religion yet, but because of image and status. So if ancient civilizations were this open about it, where did all the shame and taboo that a lot of us grew up around actually come from? Historically, a major turning point traces back much later, centuries after these ancient civilizations, well into the modern era, with the rise of certain moral and medical panic literature that framed this behavior as physically and mentally dangerous. Pamphlets and medical texts began circulating claims that it caused weakness, illness, even madness. Claims with no real scientific basis, but which spread widely and shaped public attitudes for generations. This coincided with, and was reinforced by, stricter religious and social movements that increasingly policed private behavior, especially for women whose sexuality had been discussed far more openly in several earlier ancient cultures. So the shame a lot of people associate with this topic today isn't some universal ancient human instinct. It's a relatively recent cultural layer built through specific religious, medical, and social movements stacked on top of a much older, much more casual history. Stepping back, this whole topic is a pretty good case study in something bigger. How much what feels like a permanent, universal human attitude is actually just one era's opinion, dressed up as timeless truth. The behavior itself appears to be ancient, likely older than our species itself, given how common it is across primates. But the feelings people attach to it, shame, humor, divinity, status, danger, those have shifted dramatically across cultures and centuries. Sumerians saw it as healthy. Egyptians saw it as literally world-creating. Greeks tied it to social class. Later societies pathologized it entirely. None of those reactions are more natural than the others. They're all just cultural responses layered onto the same, underlying, very old, very human behavior. So, did ancient humans masturbate? Almost certainly, yes. The behavior itself is old, likely shared with our primate ancestors, and shows up in some of the earliest art and mythology humans ever created. What's actually changed over thousands of years isn't the behavior. It's the story we've told about it. From divine creation myths, to medical fear campaigns, to modern, more evidence-based attitudes, this is really a story about how culture shapes shame, not about the behavior itself. If you found this as fascinating as I did digging into it, let me know in the comments what ancient taboo you want covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.